Good morning. Welcome to our webinar today. My name is Chen Lu. Lu is my last name, and I go by my last name. You can call me Lu. I joined the Kansas Department of Commerce in 2013. There are a couple of things I do for the department, including export assistance, foreign direct investment attraction, and business recruitment. Today, we're only focusing on the export piece. Before we get started, I have a couple of housekeeping items. Today's presentation is being recorded, so please keep yourself on mute for now, and please feel free to watch the recordings afterwards, or forward it to any companies or friends that you know who is interested in exporting to Mexico. And also, please ask questions at the end. You can submit your questions in the chat box, or you can raise your hand. To raise your hand, you need to click on the reaction button under the screen. If that doesn't work, just physically wave your hand and I can see you. Okay, well, let's get started. Today's topic is Mexico. Let me tell you something about Mexico. Mexico is great, and it's located in North America despite common belief. All the jokes aside, Mexico is Kansas' most important trading partner. In the last 5 years, Mexico ranked as #1 4 out of the 5 years. And if you go back further, if you look back the past 10 years or even the past 15 years, Mexico never fell out the top 3. It has a $2.4 trillion economy. It's the 11th largest in the world. So what does that mean? It is a big market and it has potentials. If you're already exporting to Mexico, you should think about expanding. If you're not exporting to Mexico, you should think about starting. Now we have a very, very special guest today, Mr. Tom Johnston. He is the managing partner of Business Development Partners, a Mexico City-based market research firm that the Kansas Department of Commerce contracted since 2011 to provide support to Kansas companies in Mexico. He's also our director of the Mexico office. Tom's main areas of focus are manufacturing, industrial regulation, and renewable energy. He holds a bachelor's degree in Latin American study from the State University of New York and a master's degree in public policy from the University of California at Berkeley. I'll tell you a secret. Tom is truly a gentleman and a scholar, and it is a rare occasion that we have someone of this caliber joining us, of course, other than our audience and my bosses and my colleagues. So please use this opportunity, ask questions. Without further ado, Tom, please start.
Okay, thank you, Luke. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great, wonderful. Well, thank you very much, Lou, for that kind and humbling introduction. I think the pressure's really on now. I don't want to flub anything after being called a gentleman and a scholar. So thanks for raising the bar there. And good morning to everybody. It's always a pleasure for us to meet up with our friends and colleagues in Kansas. So thanks to everybody for joining the call today. I can clearly see that's me on the screen there, but I would like to point out that we are actually a team of 4 people here in the Kansas, Mexico office. My colleagues, Jose Jimenez, Lourdes Ramirez, and Monica Ramirez. And I'll be talking momentarily a bit more about how we work and how we support companies in Kansas. Before I begin my remarks, I just want to mention that this morning we have a longer time allotted to discussion of Mexico than sometimes we have for these types of events. And so I'm going to be covering a lot of ground. Might be a lot of information, but I would invite you just to give a listen. And if you happen to hear a particular point or topic that is relevant to your business or of interest to you, I encourage you to ask a follow-up question in the question and answer portion of the session, or go ahead and contact Lou at any time, and he will be happy to set up a call in which we can discuss whatever the topic is of your interest in greater detail. The general topic areas that I plan to cover today in the next few minutes in my remarks will be first some background and description of the Kansas-Mexico office, how we work and how we engage and provide support for Kansas companies in Mexico. After that, I will discuss Mexico in terms of its economy and industries, and I will give some examples of particularly important industries here in Mexico, many of which we work in regularly. After that, I would like to make some comments about the where we are with the COVID-19 pandemic and how that has impacted the environment for doing business here in Mexico. And then I would like to conclude with some comments about the political environment, particularly with regard to how that has also impacted the situation for doing business, because we have a government now that's in many ways different from previous governments that people who have already done business in Mexico may have been familiar with the environment, and that has changed to a certain degree. So I would like to make some comments in that regard. And that said, without further ado, we may commence the discussion. So please, may we have the next slide. And then the next slide after that, please. Oops, not that lesson. How about the next slide? Perfect. Thank you very much. The Kansas-Mexico office. We are actually a private company in Mexico City. The company is called Business Development Partners, and we are a market research and trade support services company. Most of the market research we do is of the industrial type, and that includes a lot of relationship building, which I will describe a bit on the next slide, and not so much things like focus groups for brand positioning and marketing and branding and things like that, but really rather for industrial products, finding out about the characteristics of the market and finding potential business partners for our companies in Kansas. Our company was originally founded in 1994. If that rings a bell among any trade people, that's when the original NAFTA agreement was approved by the three countries' legislatures and entered into effect, I believe, in 1995 or 1994, 1995. So we really started out right at the beginning of NAFTA, which was a wild and woolly era for US-Mexico trade, and it has certainly evolved quite a bit over the years, and I'll discuss that in another slide. Our company is quite focused on Mexico. It's where we've been for most of us, most of our lives, where we've always worked, and we are most familiar with the industries. We do provide service in Central America when a particular project merits. And we don't have an office in Central America, but we have done many projects there, including trade missions, as a matter of fact. And we are quite familiar with the basic general characteristics of each country. And by Central America, in this case, I am referring to the countries from Guatemala to Panama, so in between what we would consider North America and then South America. Small countries, sometimes they are, let's say, taken on regionally, or in groups of 2 or 3 for a particular market initiative or business development purpose. But if anybody has interest in Central America for a particular business development project, certainly that is on the table if you would like to set up a call to discuss that. Next slide, please. Okay. I think Lou may have misspoke, which is very uncharacteristic of him when he said that we have been working together since 2011. Actually, we've been working together since 2001, so more than 20 years now, between our company and the Department of Commerce in Kansas, and that has been a very enjoyable and fruitful relationship over this time. During the period we have worked together, we have collaborated on over 200 projects for nearly 200 Kansas companies. This is because some companies have done more than one project. In some cases, you have a company that requests a research project and some business development and then comes to Mexico, and then we provide support while they're here and things like that. So it's not out of the question for a follow-up project to be undertaken. We have also organized and participated in 6 trade missions during this time, in which companies and oftentimes people from the state government of Kansas, together with private companies, travel to Mexico. That was, of course, in the pre-COVID era. We'll talk about that a bit more in a few moments. And including, we had one governor-led trade mission that was led by Governor Sebelius some years ago, and we have had Vice Governor and recently the acting Secretary of Commerce was here not too long ago, and so those have been very worthwhile events that we have set up and partnered with Commerce on here in Mexico. In the generally most recent era, we have been working closely with Chang Lu, whom you just met, since 2013, and we have worked very well together. So we have a very good working relationship, and it's quite open so that you can, if you're not sure whether you want to do something or you want to find out more about how we work, you can easily contact Lou, and he will be happy to give you some support in that regard, and also set up a call with us if you would like. Next slide, please. Okay, the types of services that we do. It's important to mention that the types of support services that we provide, excuse me, for Kansas companies really is driven by the needs and the specific circumstances of each company. So it could take on all kinds of forms. It turns out that the most frequently requested type of service that we are asked to carry out is the business partner search. And I'll give a more detailed explanation of that in the next slide. But that would be to find a company here in Mexico, or more than one company, that the Kansas company can work with, usually a company in Mexico that will import and distribute the products of the Kansas company, but it could be take some other type of form if a company is looking for a local company here in Mexico to provide a certain type of processing, or that carries out a certain type of activity that is relevant to the client company's business or something like that. The idea is that you, as the client, provide us the criteria, and we go out and identify the potential partners and then put the two companies together. Other types of research or support services that we provide include customized market research. Sometimes a company is interested in the Mexican market, but isn't sure whether there is an industry that is relevant to its products, and they would ask us, can you tell us what's happening in steel manufacturing, automotive, or whatever, and we put together a report to give you an idea about what's happening in that type of market, and that will help you identify whether there is sufficient potential to merit a further project to try and enter the market or something like that. Information on market sectors and business practices. It happens from time to time that a company will say, you know, we met a Mexican company at a trade show. We've been following up with them, but the questions they're asking us, or the type of thing they asked us for samples or something like that, and we're not sure whether this is common or normal. Does it sound normal to you? And these are the types of feedback we can give you, which of course is free of charge, and it helps you interpret what's happening if you don't have a lot of background previously working in Mexico. Regulatory research is another one, particularly for the type of product that food or medicines or things that go into the human body or animals. They are highly regulated, as are certain other types of products. And so you may want to know what types of regulatory compliance would my product be subject to if I were to try and export it to Mexico, and we can help you out with that as well. Meetings arranged with local companies. This was a very big one in the pre-COVID era, where a company might say, hey, I was at a trade show and I met 4 or 5 Mexican companies, and I'd like to travel to Mexico City, Guadalajara, Monterrey, or wherever, and meet up with some of these companies. Could you set up meetings with them, and we would do that. And if you needed a car and driver to take you around to their offices or an interpreter to accompany you to the meetings, we would arrange all of that for you, and that would allow you to arrive and be able to focus on the content of your meetings and not have to do a lot of phone calls and things like that to Mexican offices. And as I mentioned at the outset, services tailored to your needs. It's really driven by what you need, and we're always open to hearing from folks and asking us questions. Could you do this? Could you do that? Or what do you think about this? I mentioned things that have been commonplace in the pre-COVID era and ways in which they may have changed since the past 2 years or over the past 2 years. I can say that we have not had a in-person trade mission or any business visitors, travelers come down to Mexico since the beginning of the COVID pandemic. This is particularly because here in Mexico, we had a substantial restriction on activities, government mandated restrictions on activities. And I'll talk about that on the COVID slide, but it really affected travel and the willingness of local companies to engage in-person meetings, but I'll say a bit more about that in the COVID slide. Can we have the next slide, please? Thank you. I mentioned that the business partner search is one of the most commonly requested services. And this would usually be in the case where a Kansas company, for example, is seeking a qualified and appropriate partner in Mexico to import and sell the products of the Kansas company. And so this is something that we have done many times. And the way that we do that is we do the research. We're quite familiar with some of the major industries, or most of them. We contact the companies, we provide them information about what you do, your product, if it's a machinery or some type of equipment for a particular industry. We tell them about it, we send them information, and then we follow up and we explain to them, you know, this company in Kansas is looking for a partner in Mexico. And then we have to follow up usually quite a bit to determine whether they are willing to engage in discussions with the Kansas company about a potential business relationship. And at that point, we can connect the two companies and set up a meeting virtual these days for you to initiate some business negotiations with them. In the old days, we could get usually 4 or 5 companies that were willing to discuss business opportunities. That has gradually reduced over time because there are so many foreign companies already with established representation relationships here in Mexico. But in recent years, we still have been able to get a couple, 1, 2, 3 companies that are willing to discuss a possible sales representation, and that's about where we are at with that these days. If it turns out that we provide you the contacts, you contact the Mexican company, and for whatever reason you don't hear from them, don't get a response, or the communications are interrupted somehow, we can also help you to reestablish that communication and find out from the Mexican company if they still want to play ball, or if they still want to have discussions, or what's happening with that. And so we can provide some post-meeting support as well in that regard. Next slide, please. This is just a simple snapshot of part of the report that gives you an idea of the type of information you would receive on a company in Mexico in a report that we would provide. All of our projects have a written report at the end of the project, which provides you all the information about the contact information for the companies we have, or the potential business partners, and also a summary of their business activities, and also a summary of any discussions that we had with them and their comments, along with any type of business intelligence relevant to your particular market that we may have uncovered along the way. And it is the case that some of the companies that we talk to in the process of seeking out potential partners for your company, will make comments to us like, well, I can tell you in this market, there's only 2 brands and they have wiped out, all the other brands, and those 2 brands are blah, blah, blah. Things like that you hear sometimes in the discussions, and we include that in the reports as market intelligence that may help you make your decisions or your strategy. Next slide, please. How to carry out a project. I think that Lou may be addressing this at the following my presentation, but really the main thing to know about that is that you contact Lou at Commerce First to discuss the possibility of carrying out a project in Mexico. There's a application form to fill out. Lou will set up a call with our office, and we will have a discussion with you about your objectives and about your product to learn about it, and then we will follow up from there. But the main point to know is that Lou at Commerce is the contact person. Next slide, please. Okay, here we are. I don't know if it's raining in Kansas today. I think it was yesterday or the other day, but there it is, sunny Mexico. Some people have the idea of it with the guy with the serape and the donkey and this type of thing. And probably, I would guess most of the people on the call, if not all, have already been to Mexico at some point in their lives, oftentimes to the beaches, which you can see in the lower right there on the map where it says Caribbean Sea. That's where Cancun and Playa del Carmen and Tulum and the best known places are. But of course, there are beaches all over. But the beaches are not, for the purposes of today's discussion, the most important thing, except regarding the tourism industry. The most important thing in this case is probably that border between the United States and Mexico. Very long, I think it's 1,950 miles or something like that, nearly 2,000-mile land border. Truly remarkable. Of course, you hear quite a bit about that in the media and the political debate in the United States. But aside from questions of immigration and things like that, it's really quite an unbelievable thriving land border where you have over 1 million people crossing in both directions each day and over $1 billion in trade crossing each day. And so the logistics and the importance that represents in terms of economics and human interaction between the 2 countries is quite remarkable. The 2 best known crossing points, or at least probably the highest volume for trade, are Laredo in Texas and the Tijuana-San Diego crossing points on the northwest of Mexico, southwest of California on the Pacific coast. Also very important for trade in Mexico are the maritime ports. They're not indicated on this particular map, but we have Lázaro Cárdenas and Manzanillo on the Pacific coast, very important for NAFTA or now USMCA trade to the Midwest. A lot of rail trade goes, or rail freight goes from those West Coast maritime ports. And on the East Coast, you have Veracruz, which is there on the map, you can see. And also Altamira, which is a little further north on the Gulf of Mexico there. There are other ports, of course, but those are the most important. I should also point out Mexico City, sort of in the middle of the country. It's kind of in the southern part of the country. That's where our office is. And that's, of course, the national capital. And I'll be making some more detailed comments about Mexican economy in a moment. May we have the next slide, please? Okay, population, 130 million. That's a little bit less than half of the population of the United States. Still fairly substantial compared to most countries. As I believe Lou said, very important market for U.S. trade. I believe Mexico represents the second largest market for U.S. exports after Canada. Last year was $276 billion just of U.S. goods exports to Mexico, so very important. GDP per capita, only if you're a stats geek maybe. GDP growth, that's also pretty important for us. The most important thing to know about GDP growth in Mexico is that it was fairly stable in recent years, let's say the past 10, 15 years. not so high, but fairly stable in the 2% to 3% range. In 2020, with the COVID lockdown, GDP growth plunged 8.2%, and we have not been able to recover from that decline so far. In 2021, we had a partial recovery. This year, we are projected to recover a bit more of that, but I'll say more about that in another slide. But things are still fairly below the 2019 levels in terms of the performance of the economy. Unemployment rate, I don't think that's particularly important. I'll just mention that the official government lists the unemployment rate in the range of 4%. You know, it depends how you count these things. Everybody who's been here knows that there's quite a bit of underemployment and informal employment. You see people selling things on the streets and things like this. All of that is counted as employment, even if it's not incorporated into the formal economy. So that's kind of a asterisk type number there. One thing I did want to mention is the importance of remittances to the Mexican economy. Remittances, of course, are the money that is sent by Mexicans working abroad back to Mexico. And this is a hugely important part of the Mexican economy, and many families in Mexico, particularly in the northern part of the country and in particular states such as Michoacan in the west and in some southern states, families really survive on the money that is sent back largely from the United States, but also from Europe and elsewhere. So that's a very important part of the economy, and it has been growing steadily and breaking records every year. So that's quite important to us. Next slide, please. I get some flack for including this slide sometimes because folks say, hey, come on, you're not supposed to be bashing China, and of course, this is in no way intended to be to disparage our friends and colleagues in China. But I do like to include this slide. Mexico is a larger U.S. export market than China, simply because I find in my discussions with folks about trade in the U.S. that most people think that China is a more important trade partner, or let's say export market, or it's more important for trade to the United States than Mexico. And I think that's mostly media driven from the 2000s and 2010s, when you heard an enormous amount about companies tearing off to China to set up manufacturing facilities and things like this. The important thing I want to mention is that for actual US exports, Mexico is nearly twice the size of the market that China represents, because even if China is a larger trade partner, that's because of what the volume of goods that the United States imports from China rather than sells to China. So Mexico, really, if you compare to China as an export, as a market for US export goods, Mexico is much more important. Next slide, please. The USMCA Free Trade Agreement. I presume most folks are familiar with NAFTA, or at least the name of it, and have heard of it. If you're doing business, international business in North America, you're probably quite familiar with this. USMCA is the name of what we used to call the NAFTA agreement, which is the US, Canada, and Mexico Free Trade Agreement. What's important, I think, to mention about this is that the enormous impact it has on facilitating trade between the three countries, and in this particular case, between the United States and Mexico. In the USMCA, as opposed to NAFTA, went into effect in 2020 to replace NAFTA. The most important thing to know about that is that there were some updating of some of the regulations regarding environment, regarding rules of origin for qualifying as a NAFTA product, or qualifying for NAFTA trade benefits. And the most important thing to remember, and I find that not everybody is aware of this, but it's very important, particularly if you are a Kansas company thinking about exporting to Mexico, is that the vast majority of goods are duty-free. So if folks had to be concerned in prior eras about will there be an import duty on my product in Mexico under the USMCA, it's highly unlikely, and I think we have not had any products in the projects we have worked on that actually were subject to duties. So duty-free is a significant advantage with regard to China, for example, or with respect to China and imports here into Mexico from some other countries. So that gives an advantage to United States companies. In terms of rules of origin, that means how much of the content of your product has to be made in the United States for it to qualify for the benefits under NAFTA. That has become a more important one because those rules were made more stringent under the USMCA. It really affects more directly the automotive industry and certain other types of highly integrated supply chains for manufacturing. But we also have worked with a number of companies that are exporting or looking to export products that are partially made in Asia, for example. Excuse me. If components in your product are made in China, or if you are using materials or some types of components from China and you are putting finished processing on them in Mexico, United States, in order to export them to Mexico, it will be important to verify that they qualify for under the rules of origin for NAFTA benefits. So that's something to bear in mind, and we do find that to be fairly common. I would like to also mention that under the USMCA, there is an enormous amount of integration in certain industries. I mentioned automotive, also aerospace, and some others in which you have components and materials going back and forth from the United States to Mexico, in some cases multiple times before a product is completed. It goes to one country for processing, to another country for other types of processing. You find components from one country going to another that go into a finished product and things like that. And so that is something that really was significantly enhanced thanks to originally the NAFTA and now under the USMCA. I think I have covered the major points on this slide, integration. Okay, so with that said, let's please continue to the next slide. Now, regarding the Kansas-Mexico relationship, I think Lou covered this well in his remarks, so I'll just briefly mention again. Mexico is the #1 top market for Kansas exports, over 2.5 billion. You can see there 2.7 billion last year, and that agricultural products are among the top categories of products which Kansas exports to Mexico, as well as aircraft and machinery. In our work with Kansas companies, we don't customarily provide support for agricultural commodities such as wheat, corn, beef, things like that. However, we do work regularly with anything that goes into those industries, such as equipment and machinery, and even inputs for animal health and things like that. Just not the actual commodities, but all other types of products we have worked on many occasions. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, Mexico's key industries. Mexico is a highly developed and highly diversified industrial economy, partially thanks to its relationship with the United States and Canada under the USMCA. And there are industries of all kinds, practically not 100%, but practically whatever your product is, there is some industry in Mexico that could potentially use it, although we take this on a case-by-case basis. But I just want to mention some of the most commonly, or the biggest or most important and most thriving industries in Mexico. Top on that list is the energy industry, although that energy industry has been highly impacted by the peculiarities of the current government, and I will address that in another slide. But we have a big oil production industry, extraction, processing, distribution. We worked on a number of projects related to pipelines and pipeline equipment and things like that, meters and etc. Gas, electricity this is another one that's being impacted very strongly by the current government, but all types of equipment that go into, I don't know, these cables and towers and all types of meters and equipment that go into the electricity industry. And we have a somewhat in limbo renewable energy and industry right now, and I'll mention that again on the specific comments regarding energy. Automotive manufacturing is huge in Mexico. Mexico is a top 10 global automobile and vehicle manufacturer. You have most of the major international OEMs very active here in Mexico doing manufacturing. Ford, GM, Nissan, Mazda, Mercedes-Benz, Audi. And so these multinational OEMs, normally we are not able to engage with them here in Mexico because they are based in other countries, and that's where the decisions are made. However, you have these tiers, the tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 supply chain component manufacturers. Excuse me. That are very active and somewhat more approachable, and they need grinders and cutting equipment and coatings and things like that. And so that's where we have been able to engage sometimes with them on behalf of our clients. The aerospace manufacturing industry is another one that has grown tremendously over recent years. It's kind of like a smaller version of the automotive industry. Mexico does not manufacture complete commercial aircraft yet. It's likely to begin doing so in the coming years. However, Mexico provides a large amount of both structural and interior components and different types of components, landing gear and let's say cabin interiors and things like that for really most of the major aircraft manufacturers in the world, including Boeing, the European one, and Bombardier, which is an important manufacturer. Airbus, that's a European one. Airbus and Bombardier, and I believe Embraer as well. So all of those are quite active, and there is there are over, I think, over 350 aerospace manufacturing companies in Mexico, and they also provide an opportunity for foreign aerospace OEMs to outsource processes and manufacturing, and that's something that happens quite a bit. The tourism industry, probably the one that folks in the US are closest or more familiar with. Most folks are familiar with Cancun and that area that I mentioned before. And we also have tourism really throughout the country, mostly on the coast, with some interior locations such as San Miguel de Allende, Guanajuato, places that other people visit. And what is important about that is that anything that goes into a hotel or let's say a commercial or industrial food preparation operation, there's a big market for that. So all of these types of industrial ovens and pans and things like that, all the types of equipment that go into a hotel and transport, all these vehicles driving people back and forth and things like that, the types of secondary demand that the tourism industry creates for equipment and different types of inputs. There's a very large demand for that here. Food and beverage processing is another enormous market here, or enormous industry that creates a market for specialized equipment and machinery. Everybody probably has seen a Corona beer once or twice in their life. That's all made here. You have also, just in general, an enormous manufacturing industry for beer, also liquor and wine, but also even larger soft drinks, the Coca-Cola manufacturing, all other types of fizzy soft drinks. You also have juice processing, dairy processing, and all of this requires refrigeration equipment and all types of pumping equipment and mixers and things like that. And we've worked on a number of projects for our clients on this type of specialized equipment for the food and beverage processing industries. Agriculture, another one huge for the Midwest United States, where you have a lot of manufacturers of specialized agriculture equipment, from the big things like threshers and harvesters and even bins and things like that, sprayers. In general, the Mexican agriculture is smaller scale, than we find in the Midwest of the United States. However, there are some locations such as Jalisco in the west, Sonora in the northwest, and also in the Bajío region in the central part of the country, where particularly there has been a very large boom in protected agriculture, where you have a lot of these glass houses, I forget the name of them, but where you have the interior production of things like, you have a very large export industry for berries, cultivation for peppers, the different colored peppers, green, yellow, red, and you have also things like broccoli and asparagus and cucumber, and that type of export agriculture is entirely focused on exporting to the United States. So they need, not only do they have to comply with all the requirements. Oh, I also forgot avocado, something that most people in the United States have seen from time to time as well, a Mexican avocado, enormous industry. So anything that goes into that type of industry, that type of commercial agriculture, specifically for the export market, they use more advanced and sophisticated equipment, including precision agriculture equipment. We have undertaken projects in those areas as well for our clients. Moving on to mining, I don't know if that's particularly applicable to Kansas, but mining is an important industry in Mexico. Mexico is an important world producer of gold, silver, copper, and zinc, among other types of industrial metals. And you also have a lot of operations that do extraction of sand and gravel and things like that, in which you need different types of heavy-duty conveyor belts and these elevators that have these cups on them that move gravel up, and these some types of giant equipment specifically for mining. And we have done a number of projects in that area. In terms of the chemicals industry, that would be probably most likely in terms of the particular type of instruments and specialized equipment that goes into chemicals processing. I should mention, I didn't put pharmaceutical on this list, but that's another huge manufacturing industry that we have. But just as a parenthesis, going back to chemicals, we have some of the very large chemical producers here. I think Alpec makes plastics. You have Orbia, which is highly diversified. That's a Mexican company. And Braskem from Brazil. And so there are a lot of different types of chemicals. In terms of the petrochemical side, that's another one that has been impacted by the current government, and I'll mention that in a few moments. And just to round out this list, I included IT services. Again, I'm not 100% sure if that's particularly applicable to Kansas, but if there are companies in this area, and we did work with one data company from Kansas on a project here, we are currently experiencing a boom in the construction of data services centers where they manage huge amounts of data for providing services such as storage, processing, big data processing, and back office data management and things like that. And a lot of that is happening in the Querétaro, San Luis Potosí area in eastern central Mexico. Also call centers, I don't know how relevant that is, but that's another area that has been growing in recent years, where you have companies farming out their call center services to Mexico. Also, I should mention that in Guadalajara, there is a very thriving and important industry in software development, app development, and video game development, and that has been done really hand in hand. Excuse me, with the California software companies, and they are really working together, and that has provided a lot of development for the electronics industry and the software industry in the Guadalajara area. Next slide, please. Okay, COVID. I think this is probably a topic that everybody's getting quite ready to move on from. However, we are a little bit behind the United States in this regard. COVID-19 had an enormous impact on our economy in 2020. We had extensive period of lockdown, and at the same time, the particular the current government was highly averse to any type of support programs of the type that you may have had in the United States for employment protection and things like this. So really everybody was on their own economically during the COVID-19 lockdown. This caused a lot of companies to go out of business, a lot of smaller companies, a lot of people lost their jobs. So we had an extreme economic contraction in 2020, and we have been chipping away trying to recover from that. Since then, as I mentioned, most of the analysts are projecting that possibly beginning next year, maybe in 2024 and 25, we will return to the full levels that the Mexican economy was at before the COVID pandemic began. I mentioned that supply chains were severely affected, and this caused a downturn in our automotive manufacturing in particular, and as well as the chip shortage that I think most people are familiar with, but also difficulties in getting goods back and forth to make the automobiles and other types of manufacturing industries that were highly integrated with the United States because we had a shutdown of the trucks going back and forth and things like this. And I mentioned that the government we did not provide any types of stimulus programs or anything like that. So that's probably one of the reasons why it's taking us a while to recover from that. May I see the next slide, please? Okay, this is what I want. Current state of COVID-19. The most important thing probably to mention about this is that we have undergone several waves. I think maybe in the United States you had this as well, where things start to go down. We thought, okay, everything's going to be fine. Then it went up again. Our most recent wave was in January of this year, where the number of new cases spiked, but that has dropped precipitously since that time, and we were currently right now at the lowest level that we've probably had since the beginning of the pandemic, which is great for us, but people are already kind of suspecting that there may be another wave coming, but we don't know. Hopefully there won't be this time. The most important thing to mention with regard to the impact on the business environment is that we still are using the masks. Here there was not so much of a, let's say, a reluctance of people to use the masks, so that wasn't as big of an issue here. And if you walk around central Mexico City, where we are located, you can see that pretty much all the Mexican people are wearing the masks on the street, and all the foreign tourists are not wearing the masks. So it's easy to tell who's who in that way, at least that, in that particular detail. The head of government here in Mexico City has said that the government may consider over the next month to review the policy regarding masks, and also things like, in order to get into a business or a office building or something like that, you need to be wearing the mask still. You need to put on the hand gel, and you need to, sometimes they take your temperature and things like this, regardless of how really effective that is or not. Those are things that people got used to and are still in place here in Mexico City, as well as these types of social distancing and waiting online and this type of thing. And so those are really still quite commonplace and the norm here in Mexico, which may come as a surprise to some people. And because so many businesses shifted either to home office or to hybrid modes of work, where you go 1 day or 2 days a week to the office and the other days you work at home, that has really become widespread in the office work. And so it has become, number one, a lot more difficult to get people on the phone, because now either in reality they're not in the office, or they just say, oh, he's at home office, because people don't want to take the phone. So that has impacted the communications to a certain degree, and also the possibility of obtaining in-person meetings, because it's very common for people to say, oh, no, we're not doing meetings. It's hard to know whether that's really true, or whether people are using that as an excuse not to meet, but in the end, the result is the same. However, in cases in which there actually is interest in meeting with, for example, a company from abroad that's interested in discussing business opportunities, you can still do a virtual meeting. For companies that say, I want to go and I want to meet the people, it's likely, excuse me, that the number of meetings we would be able to obtain in person is lower than it would be before the COVID pandemic. because some companies just, as policy, simply aren't doing in-person meetings anymore. But that we can take on a case-by-case basis if a company actually decided that it was important to travel to Mexico. So that's what's happening in that regard in terms of the COVID impact on doing business. May I have the next slide, please? Okay, now for the public policy environment. I made some allusions to this. The most important thing I wanted to mention about this is that our current president, his name is Andrés Manuel López Obrador, you can see it there. He goes by his initials AMLO, that's what most people call him, AMLO. If you have heard anything about him in the media, you may have heard that he's commonly referred to as a leftist, but I think this can be easily misinterpreted. He as a leftist, he's more of a leftist in a Soviet type of model than what you might alternatively think of as one of these modern European Greens who's, interested in the environment and social issues and things like that. AMLO is most consistently focused on trying to bring certain key industries under government control. So that is principally focused on the energy industry, so that affects the oil, gas, and electricity industries, which under the previous administration had been reformed to allow private companies to participate in those industries and to carry out oil production and transport and to generate electricity. There was an enormous amount of investment in particularly wind and solar plants under the previous administration, and all of that has been put on hold now. It's been stopped by the current government because he's very focused on recovering the state-run monopoly for the oil industry and also keeping out any type of private participation, private sector participation in the energy industry. But he also has tried very hard to increase the government's participation in the economy in two areas. One, he's put many types of activities under the auspice of the military, which is something we've never had before. I think that's on the next slide. Oh, I put on there, government is not business friendly. So there's a lot of pushback from the private sector to the efforts by the government to control much of industry that was in the private sector before, and now he's trying to bring it under state-run monopolies. If we can continue, please, to the next slide, we can finish off that discussion. On energy here, government shifting oil production from private companies to Pemex. So there's no more concession contracts to private companies. Pemex is the national oil company owned by the state. And so he's trying to bring all of that under state control. The Mexican government now is seeking to stop exporting crude oil and doing all the refining here domestically. The electricity is being brought back under the state monopoly CFE, meaning numerous foreign companies, including companies from the United States and Europe, that had invested in enormous generation facilities. All of those are tied up in the courts now. They're suing over the changes in regulation that has prevented them from recovering their investment. And the main point of this with regard to our work is that it has created a substantial amount of uncertainty in terms of what the rules of play will be going forward for private companies. And that has created a lot of reluctance on the part of companies that sell to these industries to initiate new projects. And new projects are what we are always trying to create for our customers or our clients. And so there's a lot of reluctance now to take on new representations or to take on big new projects because they're not 100% sure what's going to happen with these key industries in the future. As I mentioned, the military is now operating the new capital city airport. It's building and operating a major passenger train in the southeast of the country. The president has put the ports under the operation of the military, medicine distribution, the customs service, and also policing activities. So this was something that we have never experienced before, and it's different, certainly I must say, under the current government. Also, the current government has entered into the financial services industry, liquid petroleum gas distribution, and healthcare by creating new state enterprises with a lot of built-in advantages in order to compete / drive out private companies from these industries. That's not going to be easy. A lot of it has been tied up in the courts, and there's a lot of lawsuits in trying to block these new initiatives by the government. But all of this conflict and new presidential decrees and regulation have created uncertainty, which is making it more difficult to launch new projects. And now I believe there's another slide. Okay, final slide. The question is, what happens next? Our presidential periods are 6 years long. The current president now has completed 3 years in office. He is in his 4th year, and so that he's kind of moving towards the end of his presidential term. He claims that all of this stuff that he has done is his movement, which of course he would like to continue after his period because we don't have re-election. So theoretically, unless something very strange happens, he won't have a second term. And so he has to choose who's going to be his successor. There'll be an election, but at least he gets to choose who's going to be the candidate for his party, which is now by far the majority party because lots of folks from the other parties jumped into that party. And so we have 2 main candidates. One is a sycophant of the president, so she would be more likely to continue in the same direction as the current president. And the other is the foreign secretary, and he's far more progressive in a European style, and so he would be more likely to revert some of the current government's major initiatives. And so the election will be in 2024. We don't know what the outcome will be yet, but certainly if anybody has any interest in that, we'd be happy to discuss it. So with that, I will wind up my comments. Sorry if I took a little bit too long, and I appreciate everybody hanging in there if you did. And if we have time for questions, I'll be happy to hear some. Thank you, and back to you, Lou.
Thank you, Tom. That was a great presentation, and I apologize I misspoke regarding our working relationship. It started in 2001, not 2011. My time machine always had calibration issues. I'll fix it soon. Again, the presentation is very in-depth and very informative. I think I had a couple of questions before we started. I'm sure some of our audience are as well, but you covered lots of things very in-depth. You already answered most of it. So I don't see any questions. If there are questions, please feel free to post it in the chat box. Or just raise your hand. Tom, you did mention earlier in the beginning you mostly focused on industrial projects, and right now we don't work with agricultural commodity industry. I just want to clarify. So that means we can work with all the other industries. Is that correct? Other than agricultural commodities, we can work with everything else.
That's right. I had it in my head to mention that. I don't know if I made it clear or not, but I think it is important to mention that the products, the commodity type products like wheat, corn, and soybeans, we don't actually promote those types of products, but we do work, or we are open to working with practically anything that is used to either grow, process, transport, or otherwise work with those types of products. So that would be agricultural machinery, processing equipment, transport equipment, bulk handling, and things like this, all of which we've worked with in the past.
Thank you, Tom. We're running a little bit short on time, so really quickly, is there any quarantine or vaccination requirement for U.S. Visitors seeking entering Mexico right now?
No, there's no restriction at all on folks coming into Mexico. The only thing to bear in mind is that folks need to get a negative COVID test in order to return to the United States. So that's something that any travelers to Mexico have to be aware of and make sure they get their test shortly before their return to the US.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you for all the answers. Now, before I wrap it up, if you would like to get more information or have our Mexico office possibly helping you with the Mexican market entering it, please feel free to reach out to me. And all you have to do is get in touch with me, and I will provide you with the application form. It's very simple. You can fill it out very quickly, and then we'll get it approved. There's no out-of-pocket cost for you. It's a Kansas company. The state, we will pay for it. However, in order to qualify, your product or services must be made or value added in Kansas. That's the only requirements we have. Now, with that, thank you, Tom, again, and thank you, audience, for all the insightful information and your time. And audience, we hope you found this webinar helpful. And lastly, I would like to thank all my colleagues, especially Kat and our IT team, to make this webinar possible. Please stay tuned for our future webinar events. With that, that concludes our presentation today. Thank you so much.
Hey, Lou.
Yes.
This is Kathleen. There's a quick couple questions in the Q&A.
Oh, great. Oh, great.
If you don't
I'm
mind.
so sorry. I guess
That's
this
okay.
does not
That's okay.
conclude our presentation. All right.
I have
okay,
a question
from Dave. Question on specific to our product and industry. To whom shall I direct and how shall I do so? So Dave, please reach out to me. Thank you, Kat, for putting my email address there. I'm looking forward to chatting with you, Dave. And Rick, very good to see you. You mentioned some changes in finding business partners, fewer partners available. At the risk of repeating yourself, could you please explain those changes once again? Tom?
Yes, I'll be happy to mention that. It probably seems more like a change to us because, you know, we've been looking at the interaction with local business, potential business partners here over the course of 20, 25 years. In the early days of NAFTA, you could easily contact 10 or 15 companies and you would get 6 or 7 that would be interested in talking to the client about a potential business relationship. 2 things have happened over time. One is that many, probably most or all of the specialized equipment dealers in Mexico now have established brand relationships with foreign suppliers or domestic manufacturers. And so there are fewer companies that are either not currently representing a product along the lines of what we're looking to place, or they may be willing to consider either adding an additional brand or replacing one of their currently represented brands with your product. And so to us, it looks like there are fewer because we used to be able to get 5, 6, or 7 that would be interested, and now it's more like 1, 2, or 3. And so that, in those terms, that's what I meant by it's fewer. It's not that easy, and therefore we also have some very significant, fairly recent entries into the market, such as brands from China and brands from India. And in certain product areas, you have brands from Turkey and Brazil that are also competitive here and very active in competing. So there's more competition. A lot of companies are already repping competing products. But if you have a product that's either has some type of identifiable advantage with respect to the competition, better, cheaper, good value, better service, more easy to get replacement parts, things like this, that is where we can find the opportunities, because everybody in the end is trying to expand their business and make more money. And if your product is going to make money for the local dealer, that's where we have an opportunity to engage with them.
Thank you, Tom. That was very, very helpful. That's the last question I see. So once again, thank you everybody for your time and participation. We're looking forward to having you in our future programs. With that, let's conclude. Thank you and have a great day.
Thank you, Lou. Thank you.